It's September now. Has frost come to where you are? Come along with us today as we go out in the garden and see if we have any frost damage. Good morning, it's Heidi with Broadmeadow Farm, and it is early-ish in the morning. It's just after 8 and I'm out in my mom's garden to check if we had any frost damage. This morning when we got up it was about +2, and while there wasn't any frost on our windshields this morning, I'm pretty sure that we had a touch of frost this morning and some of the more tender plants will have been hit. If you like gardening content and are curious about what life is on a farm, make sure you hit that like button down below and don't forget to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell. It keeps you notified when I upload new content, and it also helps people find my videos. So as we look here at the cucumbers, you can definitely see that there is some frost damage. If you look at the leaves, they have kind of a really shiny, damp, wet look, and there's just something about them. If you've ever had lettuce in your fridge go frozen, it's got that same look. So the leaves have certainly been hit, but if we look under here, the cucumbers are still okay, but there's a good chance that they're now all going to be finished. So we'll pick all of those cucumbers this afternoon, and then this will be finished for the season. The petunias look pretty good. They haven't been touched, so obviously just dipping under 0 to hit those cucumbers, but the petunias are doing just fine. So now that September is here, a lot of you are going to be thinking about fall bed prep and how do you get your garden ready for fall. I'm just going to walk through a couple of the things that you can do in your garden to help you get ready for fall cleanup. The beauty of doing a lot of this cleanup now in the fall is that in the spring, when you're itching to get in the garden, it's clean and you can do a lot of the soil amending and everything that you maybe run out of time in the fall. So the first thing you want to do in fall cleanup is you want to pull out any of the things that have already died. So any of your annuals, your vegetables need to be pulled up. When you pull up your vegetables, you can finish the harvesting. So after you've pulled all of the vegetables that are dead, you put them in a pile into your compost. If you live in town, you'll have to check out whether or not your local dump facility has a green space where you can dump all of your tree branches, grass clippings, and any type of yard waste. If you have a dedicated compost spot, this is great material that's going to be heaped into a pile and will compost over the seasons, and then you can spread it out later in your garden. So after you clean out your vegetable garden, anything that you've pulled out, put into that compost bed. Now once you get to your perennials, this is where you'll have a little bit more work, and so let's check that out now. This here is a monkshood that we divided last week in the video how to divide and move perennials. And what happened is, because of the shock of moving, even though it wasn't that hot, it did set it back into dormancy a little bit early. So now that it's looking like this is what we can do to prep it for fall. We can actually just come in here and we can cut all of this plant material off. So once you've got it cut down to about 6 to 8 inches, then what's going to happen in the winter, you're going to be able to catch the snow, and then that will protect your roots for the fall. I don't like to cut it down right to here because I find that there's just too much risk of not having snow cover over the roots. So by keeping it about 6 to 8 inches tall, you're going to allow for that snow cover to insulate those roots. So same goes for this plant here. This one I think is a Trolleus. We're also going to just cut it down to about 8 inches tall. So while you're cutting down all of your perennials, you want to make sure that you're getting rid of all of those little weeds that are kind of creeping in around that you haven't had a chance to deal with in the summer. Just making sure your plants are nice and clean. You'll also want to gather up all of these leaf materials and put them in your compost pile. It's really important to clean up all of that leaf material, especially if you've had some disease throughout the season. You want to make sure that any of those disease spores that might be on any of your leaves are being removed from your garden. You don't want to have the risk of having them again in the fall. During the summer, if you do start to notice a plant has some mold or some sort of disease, by all means cut it down to the bottom, even about 3 inches tall, and this is in the summer during active growing season. If you see disease, cut your plant down to about the same height, clean all of that bed material up, and I'd recommend that you actually not put that in your compost. Any diseased material I would bag up and either burn or take to the dump. Now is also a really good time to start shrinking some of your perennials if they've overgrown. This Artemisia silver mound had crept really big. It was probably at least another 2 to 3 times bigger than what this mound is. So what we've done is we've just cut it back, so that it's a little bit more manageable for next year. So what if you have a plant that's still in full bloom? Do you cut it down? I say enjoy it while you can. We haven't had a full killing frost yet. So this tiger lily, while the leaves are starting to turn, it still has beautiful blooms right here and here. So by all means, enjoy that as long as you can. But when it does come time to cutting it down, like this one here is already finished. Again, cut it down to about 6 to 8 inches and remove the plant material to your compost pile. So here's some of the beauty of having some perennials that are a bit later season blooming. This is Liatris. And you can see it's just barely finishing bloom. It's still gorgeous in color. So by all means, please keep this one in your garden until it's absolutely needed to be cleaned. But again, as with all of the other perennials, we're going to be cutting them down about 6 to 8 inches tall for cleanup. After you've got all of your plant material cut down, there's actually something you should do with your soil. And one thing I really like to do is to take my spade and I like to dig it up and just lift up clods of dirt. And what I'm doing with that is I'm allowing spaces so that when the snow does come, it can catch in those crevices and you can hold some of the moisture. Depending on where you live, sometimes it can be quite windy and you can lose your snow cover. And snow cover is super important to keep those roots insulated and protected from the extreme cold weather. You can always take some of the snow that's on your lawn and shovel it over your flower beds. Now is also a really good time to assess your plant material in your garden. Last week we talked about dividing and moving perennials, and so now you can actually see where in your garden you might need to put things. So in our Designing the Garden series, I talked a lot about plant material, and especially you want to be aware of where your plant material is in the garden. You want to make sure your shorter perennials are near the front of the garden, your mid-height ones are in the middle, and your tall ones are in the back. Also, take into consideration a spring flowering plant and a summer flowering plant. You want to intersperse them throughout your garden. So if you have something that you remembered during your garden that was kind of in the wrong spot, maybe you had a super tall perennial at the front and it blocked something, now is a great time that you can move it to the back. As you move it, make sure you cut it down to that 6 to 8 inches tall, just so that it's not stressing it. And when you are all finished, all your moving and your cutting down, now is an excellent time to make sure you give your garden a good watering in. What you're doing is creating a bit of water around the roots, and that water will help them be protected again once the temperatures start going below 0. Water will kind of insulate it. Soil without water in it can get really cold, and that's when you start to get the winter kill. So with watering in your plants and making sure in the winter they have a good snow cover, you have a greater chance of survival on your perennials. There comes a time in your garden when you're just finished. You've given up on weeding. Maybe you've harvested everything that you want to harvest in the garden and it's just time. So what we'll do here in the next week is we're just going to start pulling out all of these plants. We'll start pulling them out and we'll heap them in a compost pile. If you've got peas on a pea fence, you'll want to pull them out as well. So here we've got baler twine on the peas. So what we'll do is we'll pull up the stakes, we'll untwine the baler twine, we'll wrap that up for the future season, and then all of these pea vines are going to be pulled up. When it comes to onions and potatoes, now is the time that you should be getting them up. We were able to get probably 3/4 of our crop of onions out before it rained, but what happens if you left your onions in the garden and they did rain? You can definitely still get them out. I would encourage that you would pull them out quickly, lay them out on a tarp, that way you can get the moisture off of them. Lay your potatoes and your onions out on a tarp, either in a garage or your basement, making sure they're not exposed to the sun. What happens when they're exposed to the sun is the potatoes can go a little bit green and they just don't cure as well. And the point of laying them on the tarp is you're allowing that skin to thicken and harden a little bit before you put them into sacks to store in your cold storage room. We don't have a cold storage here at my mom's, so what we'll be doing is we'll lay them in the garage, dry them out till the soil is all dry on them, put them in sacks, and we'll keep them in a cool, dry space. If you happen to have a heated garage, this is an excellent place to do your potato storage. And when I say heated, I'm meaning keeping your temperature at about 4 degrees. So in essence, you're keeping your garage like a fridge. It's warm enough in the winter to melt any snow off of your vehicle if you actually are parking in there, but it is cool enough that you don't have any issue with your potatoes starting to sprout. If you have the luxury of having a root cellar or a well pit, that's another great place to store your potatoes, but not everybody has access to that. As you check your potatoes, you want to see this one here had a bit of a nick from the spade fork. So we'll make sure that this potato gets eaten first so it doesn't rot. Once all of these potatoes are nice and dry, we'll clean them just a little bit just by brushing them off, and then they will be stored in burlap sacks, anything that will have a bit of an airflow around it, because you want to make sure that they're not going to rot. So as you put them in the bags, you're going to check them for any green spots, any dings. The ones that were savable we cut off, and then we'll eat those ones first. The onions here, the same thing. We're letting them dry a little bit down. I will be braiding them, but the necks are still really moist. If I were to braid these onions now, they would start to fall out of the braids. So we'll give these onions probably about a week, and then I'll show you how we braid those. For those of you who followed along a little bit, you know that we are actually currently living at my parents' house because we are in the process of setting up a new acreage site. And a little update on that, we have put a deposit on a house. We have also got our name on the list for natural gas and power, so that's where we're sitting on that. Thanks for coming along. Make sure you like and subscribe this video so that you can keep up to date on the new videos that we're sharing. In the future, there'll be a few other bonus videos, things like what it looks like to harvest on a grain farm, as well. Hopefully we can start sharing some of the breaking ground at the new acreage site. So thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.